In 1944, America won a war that hadn't finished yet, not on the battlefield. In a hotel conference room in New Hampshire with 44 nations sitting around a table, exhausted and desperate for a stable future, America quietly secured something more durable than any military victory. It secured control of the financial system the entire world would use for the next 80 years. No bombs, no invasion, no casualties. Just a currency, an agreement, and the architectural advantage that has compounded into American economic dominance ever since. That moment is now being challenged for the first time since it was created. And the countries doing the challenging are not building bigger armies. They are not developing faster missiles. They are doing something far more precise, far more patient, and far more dangerous to the existing order. They are building an alternative financial system. And if they succeed, even partially, the consequences for American power, for global stability, and for the purchasing power of every dollar in your wallet will be more significant than any military conflict in recent memory. This is the war most people aren't watching, and it is already underway. To understand what's at stake, you have to understand what the dollar's dominance actually means, and what it costs everyone who lives outside it. When countries trade with each other, oil, food, electronics, machinery, they need a shared medium of exchange, a financial language both sides trust. Since 1944 and the Bretton Woods Agreement, that language has been the United States dollar. Oil is priced in dollars. Most commodities are priced in dollars. The majority of global foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. When a Vietnamese manufacturer sells goods to a Brazilian retailer, the transaction frequently clears in a currency neither country prints. This creates something economists call seigniorage, the benefit that flows to the country whose currency everyone else is forced to use. America can run trade deficits indefinitely because the world needs dollars to function. America can borrow at lower interest rates because demand for dollar-denominated assets is structurally guaranteed. America can fund its military, its debt, its global presence at a cost that would be unsustainable for any other country on earth. The dollar is not just a currency. It is a tax on the entire global economy, a quiet, continuous extraction that flows to Washington simply because of what was agreed in 1944. For the countries on the paying end of that extraction, and there are many, this arrangement has always felt less like a neutral financial standard and more like a permanent structural disadvantage. They have been waiting and working for an alternative. Here is what that alternative looks like in 2026 and why it is further along than most Western financial media is comfortable acknowledging. The BRICS bloc, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, now expanded to include several additional major economies, has been quietly constructing the architecture of a parallel financial system for several years. The pieces are specific and deliberate. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, is a direct alternative to SWIFT, the Belgian messaging network that processes the majority of international financial transactions and through which the United States exercises enormous leverage. When America sanctions a country by cutting it off from SWIFT, it is using dollar dominance as a weapon. CIPS offers a routing mechanism that bypasses that weapon entirely. The digital yuan, China's central bank digital currency, is being deployed not just domestically but in international trade agreements, specifically structured to allow transactions that settle without touching the dollar system at any point. Saudi Arabia, the anchor of the petrodollar arrangement that has reinforced dollar dominance since the 1970s, has conducted oil trades in Chinese yuan. Small in volume, enormous in symbolism, the petrodollar was the cornerstone. It moved. Russia, cut off from the Western financial system following 2022, has been forced to accelerate bilateral trade arrangements with China, India, and others that settle in local currencies. What began as a sanctions workaround has become a proof of concept, demonstrating that large-scale international trade can be conducted outside the dollar system when motivation is sufficient. Each of these developments, individually, is manageable from Washington's perspective. Together, they represent the most serious structural challenge to dollar dominance since the system was built. Here is where this stops being a geopolitical abstraction and becomes something with direct consequences for ordinary people. Dollar dominance allows the United States to import more than it exports indefinitely because the world absorbs the excess dollars as reserves. It allows America to borrow cheaply because treasury bonds are the world's preferred safe asset. It allows the Federal Reserve's decisions to function as global monetary policy, whether other countries want them to or not. If that dominance meaningfully erodes, if a significant portion of global trade begins settling outside the dollar, if reserve managers begin diversifying away from treasuries, if the structural demand for dollars declines, the consequences are not abstract. American borrowing costs rise. The trade deficit becomes harder to sustain. The Federal Reserve loses influence. Inflation becomes harder to control. The standard of living that dollar privilege has quietly subsidized for decades, cheaper imports, lower interest rates, sustainable debt, comes under pressure that cannot be absorbed without pain. This is not a prediction of imminent collapse. The dollar's position remains dominant and will not be displaced quickly or cleanly. But dominance that was once self-evidently permanent is now visibly contested, and contested systems behave differently than unchallenged ones. They require maintenance. They require concessions. They generate friction that didn't exist before. Here is the dynamic that gives this story its real tension. America's primary tool for defending dollar dominance is the same tool that is accelerating the challenge to it: sanctions. Every time the United States weaponizes the dollar system, freezing reserves, cutting countries off from SWIFT, using financial infrastructure as geopolitical leverage, it demonstrates to every other country on Earth exactly how exposed they are to that leverage. The message America intends to send is, cross us and we will destroy your financial access. The message many countries actually receive is, we need an alternative before this happens to us. Russia's exclusion from SWIFT didn't just punish Russia. It alarmed China, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and dozens of other nations that now understand with perfect clarity that their participation in the dollar system is conditional. Conditional on American approval of their behavior. That is not a financial standard. That is a leash. And powerful countries, historically, do not accept leashes indefinitely. Here is where this leaves the world in 2026. Two financial systems are now in early-stage competition. One is dominant, deeply entrenched, and backed by the most sophisticated financial markets on Earth. The other is fragmented, incomplete, and advancing more quickly than it was 5 years ago. The transition, if it continues, will not happen in a single dramatic moment. There will be no announcement, no surrender, no treaty signing in a hotel conference room the way there was in 1944. It will happen in percentages, in the slow shift of reserve allocations, in bilateral trade agreements that route around the dollar, in the quiet expansion of SIPs and the digital yuan, in the next country that decides the risk of dollar dependency outweighs the convenience. And the people who will feel it first, before the economists confirm it, before the headlines catch up, are ordinary workers in countries whose purchasing power is tied to a currency whose privilege is quietly being renegotiated by forces they never voted on and were never asked about. Here is the question that this moment leaves open. The dollar's dominance was never just an economic arrangement. It was a reflection of American power, military, institutional, reputational, a signal to the world that a center was holding. If the financial architecture built around that power begins to fragment, not because America lost a war, but because enough countries decided the cost of dependence exceeded the cost of alternatives, what does American power look like in a world where the dollar is merely one option among several? And more quietly, what does your financial life look like in a country that can no longer borrow the future at someone else's expense? That question doesn't have an answer yet, but the countries building the alternative are betting they know what it is. If this reframed something you thought was just geopolitics, share it with someone who doesn't realize their wallet is part of this story. And if you want to understand the other global forces quietly reshaping your financial reality in 2026, the next video is already waiting for you.